We're continuing our conversation here with Vance Kirkpatrick, United States Navy veteran. Hey, we're back here with Vance talking about being the plane captain guy. Back to your training there to become a crew member on an airplane there. Was that an AMP? Did you go to engine school? Was it airplane overall? Was it like an airframe and power plant?
The school was a power plant school.
Pure power plant school.
And at that time, there were only two airplanes that I recall that were turbine engines in the Navy. The F-9F Panther was one, and I think it was a F-2H Banshee was the other one.
Yeah, both Grumman products there, obviously.
Well,
yeah.
And so the school was primarily reciprocating engines. We had maybe a week on turbine engines.
Right.
And the last part of the class, one of the final exams was they had some FGs there. Have you ever heard of FGs? They were virtually F4Us. They were Corsairs, I believe, built by Goodyear.
That's right. Yeah.
And we'd have to. They had them set up so they could create different sorts of problems you might have with a power plant, and you had to go out and start the FG, do a run-up on it, analyze what problems it may or may not have,
right,
and then tell the instructor what your analysis was of it and what you would do to repair it.
Right.
And then you had some final written exams also.
Well, that's a pretty big problem board there. So they could put in scenarios into the engine.
Yeah, they could put in scenarios like mag drop, and then they'd want you to identify,
sure,
which right or left mag and what cylinder it was. And,
wow.
And you could do that by running it on if you were having drop on left mag, run it on left mag for a while, then shut it down and feel the temperature of the cylinders.
Yeah, there you go. Was the engine on a test stand, or was it actually still in the aircraft?
No, it was just an FG or
so it was just a Corsair
F4U aircraft.
Yeah,
Corsair aircraft.
Wow, so that was kind of neat.
Oh yeah,
you know. So
it was a lot of fun for a 17-year-old kid.
Yeah, I'm ready to say that's the ultimate toy right there. I mean, especially after coming out of the war years and everything that's going on there, because aviation was the deal. So, well, anyway, you got stationed out at Barber's Point,
yes.
and you actually said you were initially with the older PBYs.
That's correct. Initially, I went out there. I wasn't the plane captain on it, but we had three on the crew. We had either two or three people in my rate, and we would take turns flying in the tower. You know what the tower is on a PBY?
No,
well, it's a parasol wing, and between the wing and the fuselage, they call it the tower,
right.
And you'd go up the catwalk from you'd get in the port side on the after blister, and then walk up the catwalk about halfway, and then you'd climb up a ladder, and it had a rigger seat belt. They had all of the engine instruments and the engine controls there and the float controls, and we would take turns riding as an engineer on that. I wasn't actually.
Sure.
I was part of the crew. I wasn't the plane captain on that.
That was I think because you were sitting like right basically between the two engines, because they were mounted up high on that wing.
That's
so
right.
now where you're talking about that tower is actually what the wing, attached to that went across.
Yeah, right above your head, the wing went right across.
Right at the top there, and I think a lot of people would remember the PBY was called the Dumbo. They would call them Dumbos. I think.
We never called it that.
Yeah, well, during the war years, because you think of World War II, the PBY it would land in the ocean. It was a seaplane.
It was and the A, of course, stood for amphibian.
Right.
So we had capability of landing in the ocean or landing on land, and almost all the time we landed and took off on land.
Right.
It was. They used to say about the PBY, it had one speed. It took off, landed, and cruised at 95 knots.
Right. Okay.
And one of the problems in water landings on that we never did water landings except behind Ford Island, where the sea was calm.
Calm, yeah.
And the one problem with the PBY, it had no landing flaps on it, which was pretty unusual for that large of an airplane.
You bet.
And so you couldn't vary your speed much. You landed about the speed you cruised at, and if you had a rough sea, you were going to tear the airplane apart. But,
right, yeah.
So we only landed when the water was very smooth.
Yeah.
What our function was there, we were used as a air-sea rescue unit, and we would go out on searches. Sometimes, I forget what the fuel capacity was now on it. It had two 1830 Pratt & Whitney engines, and it would, I know I've been up over 12 hours on searches before on it.
Yeah.
We had our own, right below my station was the galley, where you had a stove and you could cook your food and all of that.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you didn't want to land unless the water was pretty smooth,
Yeah.
except on land.
I heard some PBY pilots talk about in the past, of trying to land on a rough sea, and you try to do it between the swells.
Yeah.
And it was very technical, and very testing.
Yeah.
But when you're an air-sea rescue, whether it was a ship that was sunk or an airplane went down, you were responsible for rescuing the crew. Well, there was no, I'm turning back, we'll come back later when the seas are calm.
In fact, the few times we found anything, we would, of course, radio the information and location back, and they would usually send a small craft out, and we would drop a life raft and so forth.
Yeah, so you weren't way out when you were you were pretty much
we
around.
did searches mostly around the Hawaiian Islands.
Okay.
We were, of course, on Oahu, on the west end of Oahu, and we went as far out as Midway Island.
Sure. Okay.
And that's, as I recall, about I think about 1,100 nautical miles from Oahu.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, we then would be able to land on Midway.
Sure.
To refuel there.
Yeah. We'll take our next break here, and we'll continue the journey here into the Neptune. Okay, and then during this break we'll all sit there and we'll try to compensate 12 hours in an airplane, okay, on patrol. So we'll be right back here with Vance. Thank you for tuning in to this installment of AV Veterans Talk here at Aerotech News.